when you have an inflationary environment with runaway printing of money from your on your currency, typically governments like to legislate heavy taxation to pay back the treasury from all the borrowing they did. And it's simple math, right? The debt has to get paid somehow. So what are they going to do at the end of the day? They'll go after their citizens to pay that debt. And typically that'll be through the estate tax.
Hi, this is Chris German. Welcome back to the Apartment Dealer Show. With me today, I'll have Mr. Stephen Hall. Now, if you're an avid viewer of our show, you've seen Steve before. And the reason why we invite Steve is Steve's firm, Robert Hall and Associates here in Glendale, California, has been working with landlords like you for over 40 years now, help mitigate your taxes as an investor, as a landlord. Steve is much more than just a CPA. He's actually an enrolled agent, EA, which means he can represent you and I at the federal level should we get in hot water with our taxes. But that's not going to happen because with Steve's advice, Steve's guidance, Steve shares with us what we need to know about the tax code as it is today and what's proposed or what potential changes may we see down the line given all that's taking place here currently with the economy, with inflation, with rising interest rates, and with the federal government's debt increasing. How will they pay that bill? Are they going to put their hands in your pockets as a landlord? That's what we'll be discussing today. Now be sure to subscribe to our channel. This way you get the alerts as we're interviewing investors and sharing that information that will help you with the management of your properties. You'll get that alert that we've released a new video. And be sure to give the video a like, share a comment, share the video with would-be landlords, current landlords, so that they have this information to thrive in the market as it is now. And with that, help me welcome Mr. Stephen Hall. So Steve, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Chris.
Now, we invite you on this show because you're much more than a CPA. Of course, you're an investor yourself, have been investing in real estate for some time. You've been involved in startup companies. You study the markets very closely. What do you make of the inflation that we see right now? They're trying to tell us, well, initially they said it's transitory, it's due to the supply issues, but I mean, is this a short-term or long-term, and how do you see things?
Great question, Chris. I mean, there's a lot of changes that have been taking place the last couple of months, especially since Ukraine and Russia have had their conflict, unfortunately. So when you look at From Economist magazine, they have a weekly commodity price index. And currently, food, for example, has gone up 30.1% this year alone, and it went up 5.9% in the month of March alone. So when you annualize that, that's a 72% increase just at food. And when you look at oil has gone up 90% in a year. And I'm sure we're all experiencing that at the gas station. So long-term effects of inflation, it's definitely going to be a long-term, we're going to continue to see the cycle, because remember, when the government prints money, you pay the price eventually. And now this country is paying the price. And there's a great writer and historian named Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is a former private equity hedge fund manager that wrote a series of videos about the Great Reset. And this is part of the Great Reset. So today, the US dollar is part of the reserve currency, and we are the reserve currency for oil. But that reserve currency status is being questioned as we speak. And you see several articles that have been published the last couple of weeks stipulating that they may move away from the US dollar as a reserve currency. So you'll continue to see inflationary cycles like what we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the Great Reset, because you hear more, I would say 3-4 years ago, people would have said, well, that's just some type of a conspiracy. But you have a lot of smart people now talking about, if you're looking at what the nations around the globe are doing, the direction things are going, it's not something just here at home, and it's not just a plot to a sci-fi movie anymore. It definitely looks like there's many things coming to a head. And that's one of the things we look to address at our upcoming apartment owners educational luncheon. We don't have as much time to dive into it here now, but we will definitely dive into it then. Now, let me ask you, I interviewed our friend Bruce Norris a week ago. Of course, you guys reside in Florida, both of you now who used to be Californians. He was teasing me that he's only paying, I guess you guys are like at $4 and some change a gallon, and we're definitely over $6. But I guess that's always been kind of the ratio. But my question to him on this inflation, or with respect to inflation, is, well, does it necessarily mean that wages are going to grow at the same time? So the consumer is not really going to lose buying power. Should we anticipate, because you here locally, and I don't know what it's like in Florida, but because people are battling for labor, which is something that's come out of COVID, but there, you have McDonald's paying people over $20. You have waitresses making over $20 an hour, because again, they have to encourage people apparently to come out of the woodworks and work. And I'm not saying these people aren't worth $20 an hour. I'm just saying that's a big jump from what was probably $15 an hour prior to 2020. What's your take on the growth of wages and inflation as we see it right now?
Well, when you look at food prices right now, an American family that needs to put food on the table, their cost just went up 31%. So you naturally need wage inflation to cover those food costs. So that's a circulatory effect where you make more money, but you're spending more to just break even or to put food on the table. But there's going to be a day of reckoning where you're going to get to the point where you have too much of an inflationary increase where the people can't support it. And then that's when the economy starts slowing down. And then you're going to start seeing wages get flatter or go down on a downward trend. And the only reason, it's a simple supply demand, because the fewer jobs there are available, the less money people are going to be willing to take in order to get paid. And right now you have the opposite effect where there's a very tight labor force where you have few employees that are available for specific trades with many openings. So right now the supplier is the employee and the demand is the job, right? So it's the other way around where there's few jobs, few employees available for the jobs that are open. So, but that will change over time, because when you look at history, you go through this kind of a transitionatory phase that ends up the other way around, where you have plenty of people, but not enough jobs down the road with an inflationary environment over time.
Now, at the beginning of the Biden administration, part of what Biden ran on was changing the tax code in some pretty major ways. There's 3 specific ways that would affect landlords. They discussed changing the way step-up basis works, essentially limiting the amount of step-up basis you would be able to take on a property. They were talking about changing the 1031 exchange rules, again, limiting how much you could roll over tax-free. And there was also discussion of increasing capital gains tax to a significant level. Now, we haven't seen any movement with any 3. So is the coast clear? And should landlords assume, okay, they're not going to try to go in that direction any longer?
Actually, it's the direct opposite. If you look at what Ray Dalio writes or some of the other economists out there, when you have an inflationary environment with runaway printing of money on your currency, typically governments like to legislate heavy taxation to pay back the treasury from all the borrowing they did. And it's just a simple math, right? The debt has to get paid somehow. So what are they going to do at the end of the day? They'll go after their citizens to pay that debt. And typically that'll be through the estate tax. And there's a great potential that we'll see a very different estate tax system the next decade. For example, what you just said with the Biden administration will remove the step up in basis and other activity like that. Or for example, they may just simply lower the estate tax ceiling. Why? Because they need to pay for the debt they borrowed. And Japan went through the cycle. Japan heavily taxes their citizens when they pass away. Argentina went through something similar. I mean, many countries go through this that have a large debt of borrowing spend through their economy.
To think that you're not going to have to pay the piper is unrealistic, right? We've printed all this money. At some point, you have to shore up the money, hence the increasing of interest rates. and you got to do something to stop inflation. And right now, the Fed, they're at an interesting point because they have to raise rates fast enough to fight inflation, but at the same time, they can't raise them too fast where you set the economy in a recession, right? So it's a balancing act. And with this quarter point that seemed to jolt the market, a lot of news, they raised the rate a quarter point. With respect to inflation, doesn't do much, right? It doesn't move the needle enough. And so now they're talking about 0.5% the next go around when they raise rates, and 7 times this year. And I imagine they'll make good on that promise. And even if they don't raise it 7 times, could you imagine a quarter point to 0.5 point, even 5 times, where that'll take interest rates when we're talking about real estate? It totally changes the underwriting of investments for sure, especially when you're looking at cap rates on apartments.
I agree. But when you look at the long-term effects of inflation or runaway printing of money, at the end of the day, the landlord will always come ahead with their real estate, their land, and also the building itself, because the building itself is a commodity with all the building materials that are put together on the building, right? Because what you're going to see now is that existing buildings are going to be cheaper to buy than to build up ground up because of the cost of building material. So your building, in fact, is a commodity when you look at it at the end of the day, with all the materials that are composes of that building to construct it. So real estate is a great asset to have long term, because when you look at countries like Argentina, Japan, or South Korea that went through this reset of currency, et cetera, over time they recover. Their land recovers. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to go down. It will go down in value. But if you keep it long enough, it'll definitely recover its value going through the cycles.
For sure. And that's one of the beauties, assuming you have that runway ahead of you in terms of time, right? Then it always bounces back. Now, of course, we have elections later this year, and I'm not here to say, right or left, but it seems to me the left is going to have a tough time given the way things are now with inflation, the cost of living increasing, and all the rest. What's the agenda they're going to run on? And I would assume that they'll start touting, like you mentioned, tax increases, talking about going after the quote unquote wealthy, which essentially is most of the landlords that are watching this show right now. They would be considered among the wealthy. What do you see proposed rumblings of in terms of changes to the tax code as we go throughout this year?
Well, Ray Dalio said it best, just that when you have a reserve currency that prints too much money, like whether it was Roman times, the Belgian Empire, or the British Empire, what happens over time to the value of the currency? It goes down. And when it goes down and you print too much money, how do you pay your debts? You tax your citizens. It's that simple. Whether it's a red party or a blue party or a purple party, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's math. And what these governments try to do is to confuse the population with red, blue, or purple parties. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to math about how you're going to pay your debts.
So talking about debt. So this week, as the recording of this show, Biden just rolled out this $5.8 trillion budget proposal. And again, which amounts to just more printing of money. And I'm curious if you've had a chance to take a look at that, look at the major points that would affect landlords, any meat in it that you could share with the landlords.
Well, the meat is that, like, it's going to be the recurring theme where they're trying to tax folks that have a high net worth, $1 billion plus or a couple $100 million plus, and do a phantom tax. Now, the countries that do this over time lose their citizens that have money. Tax structure won't help folks. That's why people go to Monaco in Europe. This is why people leave Spain to go to other countries, because some European countries charge you on your net worth, like Spain does or Colombia does. And I can't think of the top of my head other European countries, but eventually their rich citizens leave the nation as a result of their punitive tax structure. They're discouraging growth of your money. So whenever you discourage growth of your money, what happens? You leave, or you find another jurisdiction like Bruce and I did to go to pay no income tax. And so when you look at what Biden is doing, short term, he's going to make money, but long term, it could be potentially a big disaster for the economy and for the country, for its citizens. And Ray Dalio said it best, is that this is a classic example of a government that printed too much money, and now they need to print even more money to shore up their infrastructure, and then now they're going to turn to its citizens to pay for it, or they go to a conflict, because most reserve currencies, when you get into this situation, they have a war of some kind, so that way they can spend their way through the problem and potentially reset their debts.
And for those of you who may not be familiar with the name Ray Dalio, he's an American citizen and American businessman. And as Steve mentioned, ran one of the largest hedge funds. And so it's not that he's anti-American, he's very pro-American, but I like the fact that he's willing to take this objective view of, well, here's the American policy or monetary policy as it is today, and here's what's wrong with it, and here's the potential disaster. And he also talks about the potential shift between, we've always been the number one world power, but with everything that's taken place in the direction we've been going for some time, there may be a shift in that power, who becomes the world power. And so just for those of you who may not be familiar with the name Ray Dalio. Now, Steve, to that point, the quote unquote rich. And again, when we hear that term, I think the biggest point, especially here in California, where they've attacked landlords with rent control and the eviction moratoriums and everything else, there was even talk at one point during COVID that if you owned 5 or more units and you went to eviction court, that the judges were going to be ordered to assume that since you owned 5 units or more, you could bear the burden, the financial burden of housing your tenants for free. Now, obviously, that never became a law, but that's what a politician dreamed up. One of these politicians just dreamed up, well, if you have 5 or more units, somehow arbitrarily, you're quote unquote rich. So your family obviously works with landlords who say have $1 million net worth, which again is many of our viewers, to those that have $100 million worth of net worth. As you take a look at the difference between those two groups, the wealthy and the ultra wealthy, many of them have the same initial starting story. Many of them immigrants, or they start out here with 2 nickels to rub together, and then all of a sudden they amass this wealth over time. They bootstrap it, work hard, and so forth. But what would you say is the difference in approach, the philosophy of those that are on the higher end of the spectrum when it comes to net worth?
The difference is, there's a saying I learned from a gentleman named Joe Bauer. The difference between a millionaire and a billionaire is you delegate. It's simple. The folks that have property management teams and analysts on part of their team to look for assets or to invest their assets are ultra high net worths. The folks that do everything themselves, manage the properties themselves, fix the leaky toilets themselves, are millionaires. It's simple. And it's your most valuable currency is time. So the question is, where do you want to invest your time to grow? Do you want to invest it in the building yourself with your hands, or do you want to invest it in your people to help you scale and grow and diversify? Because the key is going to also be, going forward, it's going to be important to diversify into different regions, different markets. Like you said, Chris, there are social policies at the municipality level that are trying to dictate cash flow for our audience here, as far as what they can do and how they can do it, from evicting and accepting tenants, et cetera. And so it's important to diversify the regions you're invested in and buying, as well as different asset classes to create hedges against the currency, especially if you're holding on to a large cash position in US dollars.
And so, Mike Brennan, who's been a part of our educational platform and that you've spoken alongside of at our educational events, he's involved in the legislation in the state, and he really feels like they're going after the small mom and pop landlords. And when this all shakes out, it's really going to be those that have a fairly large portfolio of real estate that may fare well, but the small mom and pops, those that you mentioned that are not delegating and staying small, they're the ones that are going to get hurt the most. And along that thread, I think it was maybe 2 events ago, I asked all the speakers, hey, what's your take on growth? Because for many landlords, they assume that as you grow, it's actually a bigger draw on your time, a bigger draw on your finances, more stress, more headaches, and what have you. But we have individuals like Mike Brennan that are saying, hey, you have to grow in order to be able to deal with all that's taking place here in California. Steven Spear, to the same point, said, and to your point, well, if you own a duplex you're probably not that great of a manager because you're just managing the one person, behind you. And as you get larger, you get better in management. For those that you work with, and of course, you've been a real estate investor yourself, what's your take on growth? Is growth good? Is it almost a moral question? If you could, then you should, in terms of growth in your portfolio?
Growth is great because the more you grow with analyzing the right amount of risk, the more efficient you're going to be. And also the more purchasing power you'll have with your vendors, as well as your banks. For example, Donald Trump said it best, when he had the Trump casino, he was a couple $100 million in debt. And if he failed, the banks would fail. So he got all the banks into a room and said, listen, we could be in court for 10 years trying to do a workout on this financing. But if we all work it out here in this conference room, we'll be able to keep the debt structured properly, and nobody would fail. And that's what ended up happening. Trump had enough debt on their balance sheets that they had to renegotiate their deals with him. So the bigger you get, the more purchasing power you'll have to renegotiate and do workouts with your banks if there's a turn in the economy. So that's important too, because as you grow and your value of your buildings go up, like we're going through right now, a phase where buildings are going to continue to rise because we're in the early phase of inflation. And then if something turns in Europe, for example, where there's a big flight of capital out of Europe, it's going to come here in the US, then assets are going to continue to rise. But then there's going to be a day where free falls the other way. But if it free falls, the banks then are going to have issues where they don't want to take over these assets. But if you're big enough, you'll be able to renegotiate your loan terms with your banks and do a workout. Because if you fail, they fail. So that's what's the beauty of being big, is that you can weather these storms and renegotiate your term sheets with your vendors.
Well, I have a client who made the joke that you own enough apartment units when the laundry income can pay for your lifestyle. And I thought that's a great approach, when the income from the laundry machines could pay for your lifestyle. But the other side of that is, if you stay small and just pay down debt, you actually become more exposed to taxes over time because you run out of write-offs. You don't have any, depreciation goes down over time. You don't have any interest to write off from a loan as time goes on. And so if anything, you're just exposing yourself to that much more tax, as opposed to, I have clients who simply buy real estate just because of the depreciation. They need the depreciation in order to put against their income, or else they would get slaughtered. Do I have that right? That as investors, as they're paying down the interest on their loans, and yes, that's a conservative position to not have debt, but at the same time, you have more tax exposure. And again, you're losing depreciation over time. Should individuals look to make moves so that they have these tax write-offs to work with?
Yes, absolutely. So when you buy a building now, you can even do a cost segregation study on the building and accelerate your depreciation to offset against your taxes. It's a great vehicle to have. And again, it goes back to the theme of just continuing to grow. Now, if you're older and you don't want to grow, I understand that too, where you just want to enjoy yourself and not put time into it. You could do that too. It just depends on where you are in life. But if you're older and you have a team around you that does a lot of the work for you, then you could continue to grow. It just comes down to what the family's philosophy is about either hiring staff to help grow, or to grow yourself, or to wind things down and just ride through these cycles.
One of the questions we're going to be posing, Steve, at our educational luncheon for the landlords is the door of opportunity closing for multifamily investments? When you look at the laws that have come into place and those that are being proposed specifically here in California, as you look at the cost of living increasing, tenants having to battle that increase, can we continue to raise rents, and what's going to happen as we compete with rising interest rates? Because right now we're at the outset of what looks to be a major shift in interest rates, right? So for the last, 3 decades, essentially interest rates have over time been trending downwards. Now we're going to be in a shift the other way. Over time, they'll be trending upwards. First of all, do you believe I have that correct, that this is not something just that we're talking about in 2022, but it's actually a major shift in the direction of interest rates? And second, do you think that would negatively impact real estate values?
It's short term. Your values are probably going to be flat in terms of appreciation, but long term, you go through these cycles. I mean, it's like anything. In the 80s, we had 8-9% interest rates with low cap rates where properties continue to rise. So again, it's a cycle. We have to go through. You're going to have a lower values, and then we'll go out on the other side with higher values. Now, if you were to ask me to predict the future about what's going to happen right now, with even though the interest rates have risen, there's very little inventory, right, Chris?
Mhm.
Are you seeing
Correct.
a lot of inventory?
Yeah, no, the inventory is slim.
It's slim. Even though how many interest points did the interest rate go up the last 90 days?
For a commercial loan, property 5+ units is interesting. I've asked the lenders this. So we went from 3.5% to 4%. And then if you're looking for smaller investments, 2 to 4 units, they've seen the biggest shift. We went from say 3.6 to nearly 5.5 on these residential loans, 2 to 4 units. That dramatically changes the underwriting of a
But
property.
even though the interest rate went up 5.5%, what happened to property values? Did they continue to rise or did they flat?
Well, they haven't gone the other direction, right? So they're holding. I don't know that they're going up, but they're holding for the
Flat.
time. Mhm.
They're flat, right?
Correct.
So there you go. So based on current data that you see in real time, Chris, you're seeing even though the interest rate went up 1 to 2 percentage points from its all-time low, inventory is still low and the pricing has not risen, but it's flat. So as of right now, if down the road in a couple of quarters, the confidence of the buyers may change to where there will be less pool of buyers out there. And as a result, the demand will go down, then the supply will increase. But we haven't seen that yet. For example, I talked to a colleague earlier this week in Burbank, and he said there are only 20 properties on the market in all of Burbank. And that's a large metropolitan area when you think of Burbank by the Burbank
Sure.
Airport in the valley. They only have 20 parcels available for sale for that whole metropolitan region. So that tells you clearly there's consumer confidence into buying regardless of interest rates right now. And we had this in the early 80s as well, where there's consumer confidence at 8-9% interest rates. It just comes down to how long will this last before the consumer confidence wanes and you have higher unemployment, and then you have an increased amount of supply of property. And then at that point, you'll have a different environment for terms of values.
Yeah. So time will tell, and we look forward to having you at our up and coming educational event. We definitely appreciate your time, appreciate your input. It definitely is a great conversation that we have amongst the speakers as we tackle everything as it's changing in real time. Steve, thank you again. If the viewers wanted to reach you or reach your office for help, for some insight, for some tax advice, what's the best way for them to reach your office?
The best way actually is just shoot me an email. It's Stephen@roberthalltaxes.com, STEPHEN at ROBERTHALLTAXES.com. Just shoot me an email and I'll be more than happy. Since they're your colleagues, Chris, I'll be more than happy to respond and answer their questions or direct the email to the appropriate person in our office.
All right, Steve. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time today. We'll be seeing each other soon.
Thanks, Chris. Take care.
I hope you found today's show informative. I hope that this gives you some insights of what you need to be cognizant of as a multifamily investor, as a real estate investor. We're going to see change. No doubt the market is going through a shift. And when it comes to taxes, we need to know how to mitigate those taxes, because that's one of the greatest ways to hold on to your wealth and to pass on your wealth to your heirs, to your future heirs, to those that you are most concerned with. I hope this helps you in the management and growth of your financial legacy in multifamily properties. Be sure, if you have not already, to subscribe to our channel. We have a lot more content that we're going to be sharing. We have our one of the largest events we do throughout the year, our educational event coming up here in a couple of months. And I'm sure that maybe if you can't be in attendance, that's only available to those multifamily investors that own here in LA County, San Bernardino County, Riverside County, Orange County. But I'm sure we'll be sharing snippets of that, the major meat and potatoes from that event, and of course, the other videos that we will be sharing down the road. I myself am going through 2 purchases right now on multifamily properties. And as we go through the rehab, the re-tenanting of the properties, raising rents, and all the rest, we'll be sharing with you the blow by blow so that you can see how it is we do the things here at Apartment Dealer with my own personal investments. Chris German from the Apartment Dealer, and as always, wishing you positive cash flow, tenants who behave, and much protection from Uncle Sam. Till next time.